You don't nuke a man's career mid-deal unless you're trying to cover something up. My name is Troy Maddox. I'm 41 years old. I live out of airports and boardrooms more than any single place, but my home base is technically Atlanta, Georgia. That night, I was in Singapore, sitting in a sterile conference room with glass walls and too much air conditioning. A 6-liter bottle of mineral water sweated next to my laptop. I was finalizing a billion-dollar contract between my firm Virion Systems and a German telecom group that had been notoriously difficult since day one. 9 months of nonstop strategy, legal gymnastics, and internal firefighting had brought me here. I'd led the entire deal from scratch, and then at 2:03 a.m., my phone buzzed. Caller ID, Lance Holcomb, CEO. I didn't even hesitate. Lance was a blunt man, too busy for pleasantries. I figured he was calling about final signatures or a last-minute compliance worry. I answered. His voice was cool and surgical. Troy, effective immediately, we're terminating your contract with Virion. No severance, no PR exit, just walk. For a second, I thought I misheard him. What? Your access has already been revoked. I blinked at my laptop. A soft pop-up bloomed in the corner. Session expired. Please contact administrator. I clicked again. Same thing. I refreshed the VPN. Locked out. Everything, my inbox, my project files, even my calendar, gone. Just like that. I wasn't terminated. I was digitally erased. Lance, what the hell are you talking about? You'll get formal notification soon, he said. Don't make this uglier than it needs to be. Is this about the Germany deal? A beat of silence. You're a smart man, Troy. Don't force me to say things I don't want on record. And he hung up. I sat there in that cold, glossy room for a full minute before I moved. The silence was louder than the AC. Then I shut my laptop, what was left of it, and stood. My hands were shaking. Not with fear, with fury. They didn't just fire me. They didn't even give me the dignity of a conversation. They executed a pre-planned erasure at mid-project with no warning. And for what? Because the deal was too hot? Because I'd seen too much? I pulled out my phone and checked my personal email. Still active. At least for now. Nothing there yet. I checked texts, nothing from HR, nothing from legal, just Lance's call, like I didn't exist anymore. I opened the shared workgroup thread I'd used daily for the Germany deal. It showed, you are no longer a member of this workspace. Gone. Every message, every document, every late-night negotiation strategy wiped like I was never there. And then the kicker. I checked the internal deal room one more time from my phone. Just a sliver of cached data remained, enough to confirm what I feared most. My name was no longer listed as lead strategist on the contract. Someone had overwritten the deal metadata. They hadn't just fired me. They'd rewritten the story, without me in it. I stood by the window and looked out at the quiet Singapore skyline. The Marina Bay towers shimmered across the water. I was still in the same suit I'd worn all day, still wearing the name badge from earlier meetings. But now, none of it mattered. Not to them. To them, I was just another loose end. What they didn't realize is when you cut off a man like that, clean, surgical, merciless, you better make damn sure he doesn't have anything left to fight with. They had just turned me into a ghost. And ghosts, when they come back, don't play by the rules. Back in my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen of my personal laptop like it might suddenly spit out the answers. The room was quiet except for the hum of the mini fridge. I still hadn't taken off my tie. I wasn't tired. I was wired. First thing I did was try logging into the Virion servers through my backup credentials. Nothing. Error 403. Forbidden. Next, I pulled up my Virion email account. Sometimes the mobile redirect lags a few hours before kicking out deactivated users. I got in, but there were only 3 messages in my inbox. All 3 were trash, literally. One was a blank auto-reply from facilities. One was a calendar reminder for a meeting that no longer existed. And the third was a generic thank you for your service message signed with no name, just corporate HR. No human touch, no goodbye, no record. I clicked into the shared document hub I'd used for the Germany deal. Our cloud drive had hundreds of nested folders, financial models, risk disclosures, compliance memos. It was where I lived for the last 9 months. Gone. Not empty. Not restricted. Gone. Every single document, deleted. Like the project had never existed, except it had, and I could prove it. I remembered I had saved a local draft of the masterclass summary on my laptop last week. Pure habit. I opened the folder. There it was. One file, last modified 5 days ago. I opened it and stared. The first few sections looked the same. Standard infrastructure terms, transitional service periods, multi-party responsibility charting. Then I hit a new clause I didn't recognize. Contingency assignment of strategic liabilities. What the hell? It was a dense paragraph, legal boilerplate, buried deep in the indemnification section. But I knew how to read this stuff. I'd written most of it. The clause transferred all deal responsibilities, including risks, to secondary signatories in the event of lead strategist absence or disengagement. Absence, that word jumped off the screen. Who wrote this? And then I saw it. My name? Well, my signature, or what looked like it. I leaned in. The strokes were close, almost perfect, but something was off. The pressure on the downstroke, the slant of the T, the missing hook on the Y in Maddox. I knew my own signature. I'd been signing contracts for 15 years. This one was close, but it wasn't mine. It was forged. They'd faked my approval on a clause that handed off the entire deal if I disengaged. Then they made sure I was erased. This wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. I sat back in the stiff hotel chair, heart hammering. They'd been working on this for weeks, maybe longer. They didn't just want me gone. They needed me out of the chain of liability, out of the spotlight, out of the history. And this clause, it made sure that if anything blew up, compliance, governance, even post-merger hiccups, I'd legally never existed in the deal. No name, no signature, no responsibility. They were scrubbing me from their narrative, not just as punishment, as protection. And the worst part, it almost worked. I stared at the screen, rage slowly congealing into something colder, something useful. They thought they'd played it clean, that I'd walk away confused, maybe bitter, but quiet. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I didn't just build that contract. I built its backbone, its frameworks, its legal contingencies. I knew where the bodies were buried. And now I knew, beyond doubt, that this wasn't a professional decision. It was a hit job. And whoever orchestrated it had made one crucial mistake. They left a trail, and they'd forgotten the one rule that matters in deals like this. Ghosts don't forget. They haunt. 3 weeks before everything blew up, I was standing in a ballroom in San Francisco wearing the same tailored suit I'd worn to close our biggest contract last quarter. The Virion Systems Executive Gala was one of those polished, overpriced events where the wine flows too easily and every conversation is a soft pitch. CEOs clinked glasses with board members. VPs floated from table to table like prom kings in power ties. And I was there too, front and center. I'd earned it. After all, I'd led the Germany deal to the finish line. Lance Holcomb, our beloved CEO, had insisted I fly in from Singapore just for this event. "You're the face of the future, Troy," he'd said. "You should be seen." So I showed up. I smiled for the cameras. I shook hands and nodded at men who hadn't returned an email from me in 6 months. And then, halfway through dinner, the lights dimmed. Lance took the stage. "Let's raise a glass," he said, motioning for the crowd to quiet down. "To someone without whom this year's crown jewel deal wouldn't have been possible. To a strategist who didn't just lead, he built the battlefield." He looked straight at me. "To Troy Maddox." People clapped, stood, some whistled. I heard my name echo across the room, followed by the clinking of crystal. I felt something tighten in my chest. Pride, maybe. Relief. I stood, awkwardly at first, giving a quick nod to the crowd. Lance walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Irreplaceable," he said into the mic. "This man is irreplaceable." I actually believed him. I'd spent years keeping my head down, letting results speak for themselves. And finally, here it was. Validation. I felt seen, respected, safe. But I shouldn't have, because hours later, just as the caterer started clearing dessert and the crowd began to thin, my cousin Dean tapped me on the arm. Dean was 23, a sophomore at Stanford, and working the event through a student catering gig. I hadn't even known he'd be there. He looked nervous. "Hey," he said, pulling me aside. "Can I tell you something? It might be nothing, but—" "Go on," I said. He looked over his shoulder, making sure no one was listening. "I overheard something in the service hallway. Lance was talking to the CFO. I think her name's Teresa. They were laughing about how the guy doing the gala toast won't even see it coming." My stomach dipped. They said your replacement was already lined up, that you'd be gone before the contract even got inked. I stared at him. "You're sure they were talking about me?" Dean nodded. "They said your name. Twice." He looked at me, guilt all over his face. I didn't know what to do. I thought you should know. I thanked him, told him it was probably a misunderstanding. But deep down, something cold started brewing. I replayed the toast in my head, the words, the timing, the way Lance's hand lingered on my shoulder just a little too long. It hadn't been a celebration. It had been a eulogy, a send-off dressed in praise. They were building the narrative early. Troy was brilliant, but he burned out. He stepped away after landing the big one. We're grateful for his leadership. They were setting up the fall before I even knew there was a cliff. Compliments can be bullets in disguise. And I'd just taken one to the chest with a glass of champagne in my hand. I didn't sleep much after the gala. Not after what Dean told me. Not after the way Lance toasted me like a man being eulogized in real time. Once I knew what to look for, the signs were everywhere. Smiles that didn't reach eyes, meetings where my presence felt like an obligation, not a necessity. The clock had been ticking behind my back, and I didn't even hear it. But now I was listening. Back in Singapore, I started doing what I do best, digging. Not in the servers, I was still locked out of everything. But there were people, and people leave traces, even when they think they're being careful. First, I called Josh Trent. Josh wasn't flashy, just a compliance analyst with a quiet disposition and a knack for spotting what didn't fit. I'd worked with him on 2 prior deals, small ones, the kind where mistakes get hidden unless someone like Josh is watching. He was the kind of guy who still wore short-sleeved dress shirts and kept a spare tie in his desk drawer. But what he lacked in style, he made up for in principle. When I reached out, he answered on the second ring. "Trent," he said, "it's Maddox." There was a pause. "I heard. Man, I'm sorry." I kept my voice even. "I need your help." Another pause, this one heavier. "I'm still in the building," he said finally, "but not for long. Rumor is they're reshuffling compliance. Big sweep next quarter. That's why I'm calling now." He sighed. "What do you need?" I told him. Anything he could find about my removal. Sign-off logs, access records, edits to the Germany contract. By the time we hung up, he had already started looking. Next, I reached out to Alina Ward. Alina was head of internal counsel and one of the few people I still trusted at Virion. We'd worked together on a scandal 2 years back, procurement fraud buried under 3 layers of vendor reports. She'd covered for me then, and I'd covered for her. We understood each other. I pinged her through an encrypted channel we'd used during that crisis. She responded almost instantly. "Alina, I've been waiting for this message." Me. "So, you know." I know more than I should. I called her. We spoke for over an hour. Alina confirmed what I feared, the clause I found, the forged signature. It had been inserted 2 weeks before the gala, and it had Teresa's digital fingerprints all over it. Backdated logs, unusual metadata. Even the user credential that saved the final version didn't match up. It belonged to a junior legal assistant who had no business touching anything that's sensitive. "Why would she do it?" I asked. "Because Lance told her to," Alina said. "And because she thought no one would question it if you were already out." Did anyone else push back? One guy in legal flagged it. He's not with the company anymore. That sealed it. They had orchestrated the entire exit. Not a disciplinary removal, not a downsizing, a surgical premeditated purge. They faked my signature, reassigned my responsibilities, buried my digital footprint, and made sure I couldn't even access the wreckage. But they forgot about the people. Josh sent me the first batch of files that night, redlined edits, timestamp screenshots, network logs showing late-night activity from a workstation tagged to legal, after hours well past protocol. The assistant in question was logged in at 3:12 a.m., 2 days before my lockout. I cross-referenced it all. Every document, every metadata tag. They'd set me up, and they were sloppy. They used their own systems to erase me, and those same systems recorded every move they made. They left fingerprints on every forged line, every false edit, every override. By morning, I had enough to start building the case. Not for legal action, not yet, but for something better, something strategic. You don't go hunting until you know exactly what weapon they used on you. And now I knew. They'd tried to bury me, but they'd left the shovel behind. 6 weeks before the midnight call that ended my career, I filed quiet paperwork through a Zurich-based firm that specialized in corporate privacy, the kind of firm that doesn't advertise, the kind that answers on the third ring, never the first. Stratalink AG. On paper, it was a neutral data integration holding company. No bells, no branding. It had one job: serve as a transitional infrastructure host during multinational deal structuring. I pitched it early in the Germany negotiations as a temporary sandbox for testing data, compliance, and cross-border encryption protocols. Nobody questioned it. In fact, they liked it. Neutrality meant less liability. Germany's legal counsel nodded right through the slides. What they didn't realize, what no one at Virion realized, was that I was the sole officer listed on the registry. I was straddling. I funded it through my personal accounts. I structured it to operate independently with no ownership ties to Virion, no visibility into its officers, and no administrative override from any external entity. And more importantly, I embedded it directly into the spine of the Germany deal. The deal couldn't proceed without it. Every system we proposed, cloud infrastructure, customer migration pipelines, contract verification tech, all passed through Straddlink's architecture, which meant, by design, I controlled the rails. Back then, I didn't build Straddlink for revenge. I built it because I didn't trust the legal fog around the deal, the shifting rules, the cross-jurisdiction red tape. It was a contingency plan, a firewall in case something went sideways. Now it was my fortress, and they had built their kingdom on my land. From my hotel room in Singapore, I logged into the admin dashboard, something no one at Virion could even find without knowing the proxy chain. The dashboard lit up. User access active 0. Override attempts 3. Blocked. Infrastructure load 87%. Germany phase pre-signature mode. I sat back. 3 override attempts? Interesting. I clicked into the audit log. The most recent attempt had come 12 hours earlier from a device ID registered to Lance Holcomb's executive assistant. The override failed. Security key mismatch. Biometric confirmation failed. Of course it failed. 6 months ago, I'd installed a biometric failsafe. Retina scan plus facial match. Mine only. I stared at the screen and thought, they had no idea. No idea how deep I had embedded myself into the systems they now needed. They thought they could cut me out, scrub my name, steal the infrastructure, and plug someone else into the seat I built. But this wasn't a seat, it was a circuit. And every inch of it ran through Straddlink. I opened the contract framework, my final ace. Clause 47B, all transitional infrastructure components hosted by Straddlink AG shall remain under the exclusive operational authority of Straddlink until the full post-integration review is completed and signed by both parties, not to exceed 15 calendar days post-execution. 15 days. Once the contract was signed, and it wasn't yet, I would have exclusive operational control for over 2 weeks. That was the window I built to protect both parties from last-minute tampering. And now it was my power grab. The deal couldn't move forward without the tech, and the tech couldn't move without me. They thought they'd locked me out. But I was already inside the walls. They tried to delete my name, but they were still using the systems I'd named, built, and fortified. Every tool they needed, every asset they thought they owned, flowed through a holding company I designed to be invisible. Straddlink was never just a data entity. It was leverage, legal, quiet, undeniable. They could smear my name, they could forge documents, they could toast my replacement in a gala full of handshakes and lies, but they couldn't access what they didn't control, and they didn't control Straddlink. I did, which meant the deal still belonged to me. They just hadn't realized it yet. I didn't have to lift a finger to strike back. By the time I checked in with Josh 2 days after the override attempts, Virion was already panicking. They're trying to brute force access through the legal API, he messaged me. 3 attempts since midnight. Everyone bounced. From who? I typed. Lance's device, 1. Then 2 from the internal DevSec team. Those came flagged priority override. But get this. System flagged them all as non-verified agents. All attempts denied. Logged. Timestamped. Exactly as designed. 6 months ago, before the Germany deal even got past the early diligence phase, I'd written a biometric protocol into the sandbox deployment, back when no one was paying attention to the guts of the infrastructure. The logic was simple. No biometric match, no admin elevation. That meant no access to the real guts of the system unless it was me. Face. Retina. Voice. Triple layered verification. Paranoid? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. And now the same locks I'd built to protect the deal were shutting them out of it. They know it's you, Josh wrote a few minutes later. Lance called an emergency session with the board this morning. He didn't say your name directly, but he said, Legacy Protocol owner has failed to cooperate. I smiled at that. Failed to cooperate, like I was supposed to sit back quietly while they hijacked a deal I built from scratch. Tell me what's happening on your end, I wrote. Josh didn't sugarcoat it. 4 high-priority audit flags triggered. Deal room access logs are showing anomalies. CFO's assistant logged in under 3 separate IPs from 2 different time zones. IT flagged that. Then legal flagged the forged signature clause again. Someone finally ran it through metadata comparison software. And they know it's fake. So it was unraveling, faster than I expected. They thought they'd be subtle, that they could remove me, slide someone else in, and keep the engine running. But the engine wasn't designed to run without me. Without biometric access, they couldn't approve any further changes to infrastructure, couldn't update the network schema, couldn't even push basic updates to the client-facing platform. The Germans were already asking questions. Ingrid Weiss, lead strategist on the telecom side, sent a polite but pointed message to Virion's systems team. Please confirm whether access provisioning is delayed due to integration protocols or a change in system administrator. Your previous lead, Mr. Maddox, provided seamless coordination. Seamless coordination. That's what I was, until they cut me out and realized they didn't have the keys, because they'd never bothered to check who actually held them. They're scrambling, Josh wrote. Let them, I replied. The truth was, I didn't need to retaliate. I didn't need to crash their servers or leak anything or torch bridges in some dramatic explosion. All I had to do was nothing. The locks were already in place, the system's already built, the gate was already closed. All I had to do was sit back and let them stew. Let them realize, in meetings, in emails, in desperate late-night calls, that they couldn't override me, couldn't erase me. Couldn't move forward without my face in front of the scanner and my voice saying, authorize. The systems didn't fail. They simply refused to obey new masters. Because I hadn't designed them to be shared. I designed them to be secure. And right now, security meant one thing. Me. The man they tried to disappear. And the only one left who could open the gate. I waited 48 hours before making the call. Not because I was unsure, but because timing is everything. You don't jump into a storm while it's raging. You wait until the eye passes over, calm on the surface, but full of pressure beneath. I dialed direct. No titles, no encryption. Just a clean line. 3 rings. Then, Ingrid Weiss. Her voice was crisp, German accented. I pictured her in her minimalist office in Munich, probably sipping an espresso, already 5 documents deep into her morning routine. Ingrid was the kind of person who remembered clause numbers better than birthdays. It's Troy, I said. No company banner, no signature block, just me. There was a pause, half a beat of silence that stretched long enough to sting. Then, we were told you were reassigned. That word. Reassigned. Not fired, not removed, not exited. Reassigned. Like I'd quietly stepped away to take on another deal. Like I'd just handed off a $1 billion contract halfway through and decided to go golfing. My jaw clenched. Did they tell you why? No. Another pause. But we assumed it was internal politics. I let the silence sit. Then Ingrid added, honestly, I was hoping to hear from you. That landed harder than I expected. Why? I asked. The transition hasn't been smooth, she said. The new documents feel off. The terms are clumsy. The language is defensive. It doesn't sound like your work. It took everything in me not to smile. Ingrid wasn't one for flattery. She didn't throw around compliments to be polite. So if she said something felt off, it was because it was. And that told me everything I needed to know. They tried to replace me, but they couldn't replicate me. I haven't had access to any of the updated terms, I said. I'm no longer allowed inside the system. Ingrid didn't respond right away. Then, we noticed. The audit trail changed tone the day after your credentials went dark. Did they disclose the reason for the change? Only that operational responsibilities had shifted. She said it like it tasted bad in her mouth. No names, just vague protocol language. Sounds like their style. Troy, she said, lowering her voice, who's actually in charge of the infrastructure now? I let the silence speak for me. Then, I am. Another pause. You? Stradlink AG, I said. The transitional infrastructure entity. You remember the clause? I do. That's me. I'm the only registered officer. I still control the access points. And Virion, They're locked out. I heard her exhale through her nose, sharp, thoughtful. You built a back door. No, I said. I built the front door. They just assumed I wouldn't keep the keys. She let out a quiet, surprised chuckle. It was the closest thing I'd ever heard to amusement from Ingrid Weiss. So what now? She asked. That depends, I said. Do you still trust my version of this deal? I never stopped. There it was, the pivot, the moment every strategist waits for, when the client doesn't flinch, when the lie collapses under its own weight, when the truth, the real truth, finds a voice again. She didn't ask for a contract. She didn't ask for proof. She asked me what came next, and in that moment I knew Virion was finished. Because no matter how polished their deception, how carefully they scrubbed my name, how many fake signatures they inserted, the one thing they couldn't forge was trust. And Ingrid Weiss had just made her choice. The message from Ingrid came late Sunday evening, Munich time. Ingrid Weiss, we'll need the countersigned authority by Monday morning, local. Stratalink may proceed under your control. Please confirm. That was it. No formal letterhead, no preamble. Just the kind of message you send when decisions have already been made behind closed doors. I didn't hesitate. I logged into Stratalink's secure system and opened the master contract template. The infrastructure clause, clause 47B, was still there untouched, exactly as I had written it months ago. They hadn't seen it, or they had and didn't understand it. Upon final signature, Stratalink AG shall retain full operational control of all integrated systems for 15 calendar days post-execution. No administrative or override access shall be transferred until this period lapses or unless nullified in writing by the sole listed officer of Stratalink AG. That officer was me. I had built the clause during early framework discussions, pitched it as a stabilization buffer. No one objected. They thought it was about protecting the Germans. They didn't realize it was protecting me. I clicked into the credentials module and authenticated with the biometric keys. Retina, face, voice. Authorization confirmed. Then I executed the final digital signature package. Stratalink AG, official tech partner of the Germany infrastructure rollout, countersigned and confirmed. Timestamp 03MSDET, just under the wire. With that single click, the contract was now legally binding. Germany's system rights flowed through Stratalink. Virion couldn't touch it, couldn't update it, couldn't even view the back-end logs without my permission. And now, they'd have to go through me for everything. I wasn't just back in the deal, I was the deal. A message pinged 5 minutes later. Ingrid. Received. Executed on our end. System authority is now locked with Stratalink. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't mention Lance. She didn't care how the internal Virion drama had unfolded. She had what she needed. Control, reliability, protection. And I had what I needed. Leverage. The next morning, Virion's leadership would walk into the office expecting to control the final implementation phase. They'd expect full access to the client portals, system dashboards, deployment logs. Instead, they'd see a hard stop. Every tool behind a wall, every wall owned by Stratalink, and every gate locked under my name. They hadn't read the contract closely enough. Or maybe they had, and assumed I'd be long gone by the time it mattered. They thought they were building an empire. They didn't realize they built it on land I owned. And now the ink was dry. They couldn't claw it back, couldn't revise what had been signed, couldn't reverse the clause that handed me full operational authority for 15 days. 15 days was enough time to restructure, enough time to transition, enough time to make sure they never got it back. I stared at the confirmation screen a moment longer, feeling the weight of what just happened settle in. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about something purer. They tried to erase me from the story, but I'd written the last chapter. And now the pen was in my hand, and the contract bore my signature. Not Lance Holcomb's, not Virion Systems, mine. Troy Maddox, strategist, architect, and now sole controller of the infrastructure they needed to survive. Let them wake up tomorrow thinking they still held the crown. They'd discover soon enough the throne was already occupied. And the kingdom, it was mine. I woke up to headlines. Virion loses billion-dollar deal to Swiss-based Stratalink AG. Sources say CEO Lance Holcomb faces internal probe after sudden contract disruption. Infrastructure control dispute unravels major telecom agreement. Every feed I opened, LinkedIn, Bloomberg, even niche fintech blogs, was lit up. No one had the full picture yet, but they had enough. A German telecom firm had pivoted last minute to a more stable transitional partner. Virion, who had led the deal from the beginning, was now completely locked out of its own infrastructure. Stratalink AG was in control, and suddenly everyone was asking the same question: what the hell happened? Josh texted me before I finished my first coffee. Josh, they're bleeding. Holcomb suspended this morning, CFO under review, the board is in emergency session, and get this, IT finally confirmed the forged signature. Me, took them long enough. You should have seen the room when the system logs came up. They didn't even deny it, just started blaming interns. That's how it always goes. Denial, then deflection. But this time there was nowhere to hide. Josh also sent me a photo, grainy but clear, shot from across the street. Virion's headquarters in San Jose. People were walking out with boxes, some confused, some angry, some just tired. The last domino had fallen. Alina messaged me a few minutes later. I'm resigning today. Board already knows I passed you those logs, but I don't regret a damn thing. I replied simply, I owe you one. And then came the message I didn't expect. Ingrid Weiss, congratulations. We trust you. Let's build the future without the politics. That hit me harder than the headlines. She didn't need to say it, but she did. After everything Virion had tried to control, bury, twist, Ingrid still trusted me to lead. The Germans hadn't just chosen stability, they'd chosen clarity. Me and the systems I built. Without the smokescreens, without the handshakes and veneers. Just function, trust, and proof. I leaned back in the chair by the window. Singapore's morning haze was just clearing, city lights fading under the sun. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. I felt done, finished. There was no victory parade, no slow clap, just silence and relief. Because what I'd set in motion didn't need noise, it just needed precision. Virion had tried to rewrite history, scrub me out of the deal, replace me like a line of code. But the deal didn't just carry my name, it carried my fingerprint, my structure, my systems, and now my name was the one tied to its future. Let Virion scramble, let them hold press conferences and refocus strategies, let them call it a temporary pivot or a misunderstood transition. The truth had already hit the front page, and the people behind the curtain, they were packing up their desks, the ones who clapped at the gala, the ones who whispered about replacing me quietly, the ones who tried to turn me into a ghost. They were the ones disappearing now. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just watching the tower collapse under its own weight and knowing you're the one who pulled the last brick. No malice, no theatrics, just clarity, business clarity. It was a Thursday afternoon when the journalist called. Not a big outlet, just a niche tech and business magazine that had covered infrastructure deals before anyone else cared about them. She introduced herself politely, carefully. She knew this wasn't an ordinary story. I'm not looking for gossip, she said. Just context. Everyone's talking about Stratalink, but no one seems to know who's behind it. I almost declined, but something in her voice, patient, sharp, made me reconsider. She wasn't chasing headlines, she wanted the truth. So I agreed. On one condition. No names, I said. Just list me as a representative from Stratalink AG. We met in a quiet cafe just outside Zurich. Neutral ground. No suits, no cameras. Just her recorder, her questions, and my coffee. She asked about the deal, about how Stratalink came to be, about why the infrastructure pivoted so suddenly and so completely. I answered in careful phrases, never giving her more than she needed. Then she leaned in. Everyone's wondering, she said, almost gently, who you really are in all this. I looked out the window for a second. Then I turned to her and said, I'm the guy they erased, so I signed their future under my own name. She blinked. No follow-up, no push. Just nodded. She understood. The story ran 2 days later. Stratalink AG, the invisible spine behind Europe's biggest data deal. No bombshells, no scandals, just facts. And one quote buried at the end that made its way around a few boardrooms for the weekend. Sometimes the quietest man in the room is the one holding the pen. After that, things moved fast. Virion's board voted to accept Holcomb's resignation in light of recent internal findings. The CFO retired, and a bland public statement went out about rebuilding trust and embracing new leadership. None of it mattered, because the deal was no longer theirs. Josh sent me a final message after the article dropped. Josh, legendary. Let them eat that headline. I didn't respond right away. I just sat back in the quiet of my apartment. No calls, no meetings, no crisis, and finally breathed. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't sued, I hadn't begged. I just waited, signed in silence, and let the system I built speak for itself. By the time the world learned who really held the reins, it was already too late for Virion to undo anything. The legacy? It wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine, signed, sealed, and secured.